Hello, welcome to the Saturday edition of Alaska Weather. I'm meteorologist Kimberley Hoeppner, and today is December 1st, 2018, the day after the significant earthquake, and all of us here at the office, we all hope that you are doing good in these recovery moments. So in just a moment, we're going to be on with your public aviation and marine forecasts, and hold on, because we're in for a few more days of very active weather across the state. Meanwhile, don't forget, you can always get our information by going to 1-800-472-0391 on the telephone or on the internet by going to weather.gov/Alaska. Now let's start with the important topics of the day. As we are heading into the end of the weekend, we're seeing this winter weather across the west coast spreading further east as we head in through tonight. Now we do have freezing rain from McGrath north to Kivalina. This is going to be causing some travel difficulties there, and we do also expect high surf along the west coast. Now windy conditions are going to be occurring from Anchorage to the Alaska Range as we head through the overnight hours and into Sunday. And you can see across the state map, these are our watches, warnings, and advisories map. Across the locations in yellow, we have advisories out, and areas in red are warnings. Now for the areas across the west coast, primarily we're seeing some very gusty wind conditions along with blowing snow along the west coast, and we're expecting some heavier snow to develop during the overnight hours from McGrath and north. During the overnight hours, it will be spreading further across the interior, so expect blowing snow conditions mainly along the northwest coast, where they're seeing gusts between 30 to 60 miles per hour continue through the overnight hours. Now along the Alaska Range, we're seeing high wind warnings in these locations for very strong gusty southerly flow that'll be occurring through Sunday. And then for the Susitna Valley and the Anchorage Bowl and Matanuska Valley locations, we'll be seeing some snow amounts, primarily snow across the Susitna Valley will be continuing through overnight Sunday night, but not developing for the Anchorage and Matanuska Valley locations until Sunday evening. Now let's take a look at the weather satellite data to see what's rolling in your direction. We do have one low pressure upper level disturbances moving currently across the southwest and south central locations. Another low is quickly following across the eastern Aleutians to the west. And we do have another low pressure system. You can kind of see that curling up as it heads towards the Bering Strait there, just off of Kotzebue Sound. And then over to the east, let me put this into motion here, you have the frontal boundary just pushing along the upper level front, pushing towards the eastern boundary of the Alaska-Canada border. And this is primarily bringing some saturated conditions ahead of this low pressure system that's moving through. Across the southeast, we did have some clearing conditions, just some shower activity confined mainly in the central and northern areas of the Gulf this afternoon. Now let's take a look at the surface map, and we do have a warm front that's draped across the Kenai Peninsula back towards the northern areas of the Bering would be the best placement for this boundary. It is a little bit warmer as you go aloft, and that's why we're having these freezing rain conditions north of this boundary. But along the Bristol Bay locations and west, we're seeing that change over to rain this afternoon as they've warmed up into the mid-40s already. And we do have some light rain showers, like I said, occurring along and ahead of this frontal system as the upper level wave moves quicker aloft. Now across the northern tier of the state, we are seeing some lower visibilities across the Brooks Range, and some light snow is beginning to develop out ahead of the system as the upper level waves continue to move north, and the low pressure that came through yesterday is moving to the north. Now let's look out towards the west, and we do have a 976 millibar low that's stationed out there in the western areas of the Bering. A little short wave aloft is creating this next low pressure system along the southern southern waters, this is basically going to develop a new closed low system. So this will be occluded during the overnight hours, primarily bring very gusty winds across the Alaska Peninsula along the areas of Bristol Bay and the Kuskokwim Delta. And that's going to reinforce that gradient across the coastal locations, so blowing snow. And here's that southerly flow that's going to bring the high surf to the Norton Sound and Kotzebue Sound locations. Now across the Brooks Range, we're going to have the reduced visibilities below 1/2 mile at times and blowing snow all the way towards the north slope. Across the western areas of the Bering, this low is going to be weakening as this next low pressure system takes control ahead of it. Now let's take a look at the south central locations. We do have the snow move developing late this afternoon, and it's going to continue through the overnight hours. However, it's going to be pushing further north. So just a quick shot of snow there and some light rain shower activity continuing across the Prince William Sound and along the western Gulf. We will see that gradient remaining tight. So as that front lifts, we'll see that gradient squeeze and then relax across the range. Will be coming back up as we head into your day on Sunday as that next boundary moves over. So you see the orientation of the gradient begins to tighten once again. And then we'll see rain moving in with the next low pressure system that's pushing inland. It will lose its features as it pushes inland, but that upper level wave will keep enough organization that will bring a quick shot of heavier snow here across the Anchorage Bowl north towards the Matanuska and Susitna valleys through the overnight hours Sunday. So that's not going to develop until late day. Over across the southeast, mainly in the area of high pressure, so staying on the drier side with better visibilities for those locations for the end of this weekend. However, to the north, we're expecting gustier winds to continue with the tight gradient all the way towards the west part of the state. Now let's take a look at the west coast. Here's that snow just ongoing, another round of snow as the next low pressure system lifts to the north. And behind this system, still keeping those gusty flow across basically the Kuskokwim Delta into the Sunday afternoon hours. The thing that we need to focus on as we head towards the beginning of the week is this next low pressure system. This is going to be a very quickly developing low pressure system, mainly affecting the Bering initially. So as we head into Monday, expect this system to rapidly deepen, bring some very gusty winds, change of wind directions around this low pressure system. This is going to be another system that brings 40 to 60 mile-per-hour winds with possible higher gusts through channel terrain. Now across the interior, expect things to begin to taper off. However, that southeasterly flow is going to be picking up across the Bristol Bay and Alaska Peninsula locations, and rain is going to be starting to spread back towards Kodiak Island. Across the Gulf, fairly quiet into Monday with some rain and snow showers possible for the northern panhandle. And snow will be ongoing mainly for the eastern borders up to the Brooks Range location. Now as for temperatures, very cold temperatures initially across the north slope down through the interior in the single digits to teens. And across the southeast for your Sunday morning is going to be in your upper 20s to near 30, with warming trends towards the southwest in the mid-30s, mid-20s across the northern Gulf locations. And across the west coast, expect those temperatures to remain in the mid-teens to mid-20s. The Alaska Peninsula is going to be on the warmer side, mild in the mid-30s. Colder temperatures out to the west will increase a few degrees for Sunday afternoon. Temperatures will warm into the 40s once again for the Alaska Peninsula, above freezing for much of the southwest and almost to near 30 for much of the western locations of the state. Across the southern tier into the mid-30s to lower 40s, and then the eastern border is going to be the coolest in the lower teens. Now as we head into Monday morning, expect temperatures to drop below freezing again for the southeast, mainly near freezing or just below across the rest of the western and central Gulf locations. Across the interior, temperatures go back down into the teens, with temperatures a little bit more mild across the north coast, staying in the teens during the overnight hours, and also holding in the mid-20s to near 30 across the western tier of the state. Across the Bristol Bay Area, near 30 with climbing temperatures for the Alaska Peninsula. We're going to see temperatures in the mid-30s. Colder again, cold air mass advects in behind the low pressure system that moves into the Bering, keeping things on the mild side, mainly for the southern Bering, a little bit cooler to the north. Temperatures will be into the mid-30s at least, or to near 40 for much of the Gulf locations. Temperatures more mild across the northern tier of the state, climbing into the 20s for the central interiors for a lot of those locations and towards the North Slope. For the southeast, temperatures will be climbing into the mid-30s. So overall warming trend across the state for the next few days.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Now on to the aviation part of the show. Let's take a look at your MVFR and IFR conditions for Sunday morning. We'll see areas across the Brooks Range and along the North Slope, just north. Along the West Coast, we're also going to see some issues with areas across the southern tier of this state. Mainly VFR conditions, though, across the southeast to start your Sunday. And across the Bering, actually, much of the area is just going to be VFR with MVFR along the coastal areas and across the northern waters. However, in the afternoon, that's going to change as a low pressure shifts up and brings MVFR, IFR conditions back to the Aleutian Range. Across the southern tier of the state, look for widespread MVFR and IFR conditions increasing with another low pressure system coming up at Kenai and Prince William Sound locations will experience that. Also the Brooks Range and back towards the northwest coast, they'll stay in the MVFR and IFR conditions. The North Slope looks like it's going to be a VFR afternoon for Sunday, and then also for the southeast is going to be in that VFR range as well. Going into Monday, the southeast remains VFR, while much of the state will be in the MVFR to IFR categories. Now for the Gulf waters, look for widespread MVFR conditions. Kodiak will get a break for your Monday morning, and then across the western Bering and the south, we'll see widespread MVFR with patchy IFR conditions. For your afternoon on Monday, look for IFR conditions spreading towards the Alaska Peninsula. We'll see areas of IFR across the western Brooks Range towards the Seward Peninsula. Otherwise, widespread MVFR conditions across the northern tier of the state and possible MVFR conditions sneaking back towards the eastern Alaska Range. Also, the same coverage is going to stay across the central and northern areas of the Gulf, and MVFR will start to spread back towards Kodiak Island. The southeast will stay in mainly the VFR conditions, possibly Chilkoot and White Pass up there going down to MVFR. Now let's take a look at your passes in more depth. Anaktuvuk for Sunday is going to stay IFR all day, and then Adigan will go from IFR to MVFR during the afternoon. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass will go VFR to IFR, as well as Rainy, VFR to IFR. And Windy Pass will be IFR all day. Isabel will follow that trend, IFR, and Mentasta will be on the VFR side. Tenedo will be VFR in the morning and then go down to MVFR during the afternoon, while Portage goes from VFR to IFR in the afternoon. Chilkoot and White Pass, VFR for you on Sunday. Look at your freezing levels for Sunday morning. That's going to be draped across the northern Bering waters, down towards Bristol Bay and across the coast of the Gulf. As you go from the Gulf Coast and south, you'll climb your freezing levels from 2,000 to 4,000 feet. And then across the western areas of the Bering, that's going to be the same, mainly 2,000 foot level will be over the Alaska Peninsula. Now let's take a look at your main concerns for icing. There will be at some point tomorrow during the day icing concern across the state. Primary concern is going to be across the western coast, though, near the Seward Peninsula. Look for icing possibilities below 4,000 feet. And of course, southeast is going to be in the clear of these conditions. For your jet stream, it's going to be quite the amplified pattern. Across the Gulf, we have a broad troughing pattern with a ridge just across the southeast location, and we're going to see a strong jet max approaching the Aleutian chain, going from 150 knots to 110 knots. So this is a fairly active trough aloft, and therefore we have quite a few low pressure systems about the bearing. The strongest low pressure for tomorrow is going to be the central Aleutians, but probably the most impactful low is going to be here along the west coast with 40 to 60 knot winds for the western half of the state, and also creeping up there across the eastern Brooks Range, 50 knot jet increasing during the late afternoon hours. For the southeast, the ridge is going to be over in that location, so 10 to 15 knot winds around the ridge, and then the southern tier of the state between 35 to 45 knots out of the south. Now for your 3,000 foot level, very similar winds. We're looking at the strongest trends across the west coast with lighter wind speeds there for the southeast. A little bit stronger winds will increase during the afternoon up to 30 knots across the eastern Brooks Range at least. Possibly up to 80 knots across the eastern Aleutians around the low pressure to the west. So to sum this all up, main concerns are going to be across the interior locations of the state with southeast excluded.
Thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, joined again by Eric Stevens from the GINA, or Geographic Information Network of Alaska at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Thanks for joining us again, Eric.
Glad to be here.
Thanks. We are talking about satellites today, and what are satellites? And the easy way to talk about that would be to introduce our friend the globe here, which is a round spheroid type shape. We haven't been on a flat Earth as far as history is known for several hundred years now, and because of that we also know that we are orbiting around other objects in space, and that objects are orbiting around the Earth as well. We call all those things satellites in some form or fashion, right, Eric?
Right. Well, this leads to the discussion of Johannes Kepler's research 400 years ago. Did some of the early work and founded the 3 laws of planetary motion, which are important to planets and also to weather satellites.
Okay.
Kepler's first law talks about how the orbit of an object around another object is an ellipse, not necessarily a circle.
Kind of a flattened circle?
Yeah, depending on how flat
squished
it could be.
Okay.
For our purposes, we'll just say they're mostly circular.
Okay.
The second law is most important for us, though, and that is the closer an object is to the thing it's orbiting, the faster it goes. So in the solar system, the planet Mercury is the closest planet to the sun. It orbits the sun in 88 days. It moves at 100,000 kilometers an hour.
It is just
moving.
Okay.
Right. And further out from the Earth is Jupiter, and it moves at only 1/4 the speed of Mercury, and it has to go further, so it takes 12 of our years for Jupiter to make 1 lap. The further out you are, the slower you go.
Okay.
So we're talking about planets. What does it have to do with weather satellites? Turns out Kepler's laws apply to planets orbiting the sun. They also apply to satellites orbiting the Earth.
Okay.
You know, our natural satellite is the moon. There's the famous Apollo 8 Earthrise shot.
Beautiful shot.
Oh, yeah, you could just talk about that forever. December 1968, the moon is about 250,000 miles away from the Earth.
Okay.
It takes a month to go around the Earth. It's that far out, it takes a full month to do an orbit. Another shot here of the International Space Station. Instead of being 250,000 miles out, the ISS is only 250 miles up. It's really close. And so it doesn't take a full month for the space station to go around the Earth. It only takes 90 minutes. It's so close, it just whips right around 90 minutes.
Okay.
So weather satellites, there are a number of weather satellites, and there are a number of orbits. The further out you have the satellite, the longer it takes to go around the Earth. And this is important because different satellites have different purposes. So we have a satellite here. This little salt shaker lid will serve as our satellite going around the Earth. Let's say you have a satellite that's 22,000 miles above the Earth. This is kind of a magical spot, because at that distance, it takes a full day for the satellite to go around the Earth. Imagine if you put your satellite 22,000 miles up from the equator and had it go with the Earth as the Earth spun.
At the same speed.
Right. The satellite goes around the Earth just as fast as the Earth itself is turning. In effect, the satellite will hover in one spot.
I see.
And it appears when you make a movie loop of picture after picture after picture, you can replay that and you get these movie loops. Geostationary satellites, these are called. These are stationary in appearance. And they provide a constant frame of reference. We've got an example here. Another nice thing about these satellites, since they're that far out at 22,000 miles, you can see from pole to pole, which is nice. So they're pretty broad view and a constant frame of reference.
So those are the pictures. If you're watching a weather satellite loop on TV, your favorite weather show, that's the picture that you're going to see is one that's sitting over the same spot.
If you're seeing a movie loop play again and again, that came from geostationary satellites. That's the only way you can do that.
Yeah.
The bummer, though, for us in Alaska is we're up on the very top of the planet. And for geostationary satellites to work, they have to be over the equator. So for the geostationary bird to view Alaska, it's kind of like reading a book, but you're reading it edge on like that.
Right.
So there's another kind of orbit called the polar orbit, which is nice. We're near the pole.
Yeah.
And here's a satellite. Those polar orbiters are much closer to the Earth, getting down toward International Space Station elevation. And they're not in the equatorial plane. Rather, their orbital plane is inclined like this. And the Earth turns under that satellite as the satellite orbits. The nice thing about that is for Alaska, the satellite will go right over Alaska a few times a day. And so you get a much closer image. We've got a shot from the Sumi NPP satellite. Specifically, it's a true color image from the VIRS sensor. That's an acronym there. But it's a beautiful shot of Alaska, and you can see so much detail. The kind of detail, because you're close in.
Very high resolution.
You couldn't get this kind of view from geostationary satellites. The advantage of these polar orbiters is nice close imagery. You can see a lot of detail. The disadvantage, though, is that the satellite flies by, and then you have to wait a while to get the next image. And if geostationary weaknesses are that you're reading the page like that, the polar orbiter, you're reading the page straight on, but it's so close, and then it zips by, and you have to wait for the satellite to come around the Earth again. So there's no one perfect solution. Different satellites for different orbits. Each has their strength, and amazingly, it all comes back to Johannes Kepler and his laws of planetary motion. The same laws that govern how the planets orbit the sun, they govern how the satellites orbit the Earth, and even our little pretend salt shaker right here.
Right, okay. Well, since the 1957 Sputnik, we've been putting man-made objects into orbit around the Earth and starting to get pictures back. Who knows what will happen in the next 50 to 100 years. Amazing stuff.
It's a growing science, and the future is bright.
Thank you so much for joining us again, Eric. And for more information on Dehne and what the satellite systems do there and what Eric's been talking about today, you can go to the web address on your screen. For Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And now on to the marine portion of the show. We're going to take a look at the ice edge first. We're not seeing much change across the west coast here and towards the Bering Strait north. We're basically going to see more of a southerly pull through the next few days. So if anything, we might see the ice being pushed to the north, but we're not expecting any growth as we head through the next day. Now, let's take a look at the Sunday's marine forecast for the southeast. We're going to have lighter wind speeds on this day. Primarily, winds will be out of the north for the inner channels with seas between 2 to 3 feet. The outer waters will have seas around 10 feet. Now, let's take a look at your Monday forecast. A little bit of a directional wind change here, southeasterly flow across much of the area, becoming more southwesterly as you go towards the northeastern Gulf locations. Seas on this day will be between 2 to 3 feet across the inner waters and between 7 to 8 feet across the outer waters. Now for your North Gulf and the western areas of the Gulf, we'll see more of a, for Sunday, we're going to see more of an easterly flow across most of the area with a little bit more of a northeasterly pull across the Cook Inlet. Small craft advisories around the southern and western areas of the Kenai, and we'll see primarily seas across the Prince William Sound, Cook Inlet locations around 3 to 4 feet, except for the southern inlet. Stronger winds and higher waves there between 8 to 12 feet, a little bit higher across the southern Kenai. The waters across the Gulf locations between 8 to 10 feet. As we head into Monday, we'll bring a northerly flow through the Cook Inlet locations with more of a westerly flow across the Gulf and the Prince William Sound. Seas on this day will be between 3 to 4 feet across the Sound and the northern inlet, and between 6 to 8 feet across the Kenai Peninsula. A little bit higher seas, 7 to 8 feet across the northern waters of the Gulf. Let's look around the Alaska Peninsula. Stronger winds out in this direction. So we have gale force winds on Sunday expected. South to southwesterly flow for Kodiak Island. A little bit lighter wind speeds for this location. Seas across the southern areas of Kodiak Island and the Shelikof Strait will be between 5 to 11 feet, and then seas will be higher out across the peninsula between 12 to 15 feet. Now for Monday, stronger winds yet to come with a little bit of a directional change here. More of an easterly flow across, the peninsula. Will have higher gusts on the Bristol Bay side and the northern peninsula locations. We'll see gale force winds, and seas on this day will be between 6 to 10 feet around the Kodiak locations along Bristol Bay. For the rest of the peninsula, between 15 to 20-foot seas. For Sunday, for your Aleutian chain, we're looking at very strong winds coming up primarily out of the southeast direction, becoming northerly. Storm force out there towards the central Aleutians out of the east direction. For the eastern locations, we're looking at 20 to 30 knot winds, so small craft advisory across much of the central Aleutians. Otherwise, we have storm force winds and gale force winds on your way, with seas between 11 to 20 feet, increasing winds and seas for your Monday forecast. Storm force across much of the area waters. Change of wind direction, southeast becoming northerly for these locations. Seas will increase between 15 to 25 feet, and then up to 30 to 35 feet across the areas of the eastern and central Aleutians. So it's going to get very hectic out there with that next low pressure system. Along the west coast, we're going to see very gusty winds continuing. To the north, we have easterly flow becoming more southwesterly as you head towards the areas of the Bering. The southwesterly flow is going to be increasing out of the southeast for your Monday. Gale force flow for much of the central and northern Bering, although we will have more of a southeast or southwesterly direction as you head towards the Norton Sound here. 15 knots, a little bit lighter speeds for you. Seas on this day will be between 6 to 22 feet, highest seas towards that central area of the Bering. Now let's take a look at the north and west coast. Winds will be very gusty along the coast between 30 to 55 knots tonight. As we head into tomorrow, those will taper down somewhat, but still be gusty with heavy freezing spray along the west coast locations. Out of the south, small craft advisories. On Monday, a little bit lighter winds for you out of the west direction primarily. And recapping your forecast, we've got winter weather on the way tonight.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.